A growing number of people are giving up on air travel in order to help save the planet. We sat down with one such person, Nicola Davies, a children's book author and someone who can speak at length about what challenges there are, but also what opportunities there might be in going flight-free.
The biggest obstacle to flightless travel is that we are all sold the idea of the planet as a consumer comestible. That we just can, that we can just go to an airport and go and gobble up another bit. Now, I grew up at a time when that absolutely wasn't the case. Nobody did foreign travel when I was a kid. You know, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. Hardly anybody went abroad for their holidays. You went camping in Cornwall when I was a kid. I had some fantastic family holidays and some fantastic adventures in this country. And I continue to have lovely adventures in the countryside and in the wild and the mountains and the sea. We're very, very lucky in the UK. We have a wonderful range of landscapes and different cultures and different sorts of wild places that we can explore. So I think that's one solution, is just changing people's mindset. But of course, there are going to be people who, like me, are desperate to travel and to see the world. I think we just need to change our mindset about travel and to have a much bigger, longer, wider view. No, you're not going to be able to fly to a city in Europe for a city break for a weekend. No, you can't do that. But you might take 2 weeks of your summer holiday and go on a train and maybe take a bike and just do that travel at actually a much more human pace. And I think that is really totally positive, because in my experience, the travel that I've done by boats, and I've done a lot, and overland, slow travel overland, has been much more satisfying, much more enriching, much more interesting, much better by, several magnitudes at every level. So I think it's like many things around climate change and how we need to change our behaviour. Actually, it's positive, not negative.
What social or economic benefit can travel bring to make it more of a positive impact in places? You say you've experienced something yourself or heard of one scheme or another?
Well, the first thing, of course, is carbon offsetting. Now, I know that has enormous problems. But if you have to fly, then at least find a good carbon offsetting programme. The World Land Trust that I am a trustee for, we operate a carbon offsetting programme. And what that does is it helps to safeguard areas of forest around the world of very high biodiversity value, which also lock away a lot of carbon. So at least the planet is getting some benefit from your negative flying activity. So that's the first thing to do. The second thing to do is just to really think about your travel. Don't be a planet gobbler. Don't just go and consume experiences. Think, reflect, look, talk, communicate. Build bonds with people in other cultures and other places across the world. Reflect on how their culture and their different lifestyle make you think about your culture and lifestyle. Make sure that you're learning from your travel rather than just going and gobbling up a whole set of experiences and coming back completely unchanged.
To play devil's advocate, people might say, well, it's very expensive taking a train, or what am I meant to do if my family lives in Australia? Or even a girl that we spoke to actually a couple of weeks ago at the school strike, she was saying that she asked her employer for some extra time to get to Portugal where her brother lived. But they said that's not in our HR policy or whatever. What do you think about those particular challenges in terms of, let's say, the money or family? But let's focus on the employers. Do you think they have a role to play in maybe?
Absolutely. I mean, we all as individuals can start to try and take responsibility for our carbon footprint and to change our behaviour. But then the next level up is that companies, governments really need to start putting their money where their mouth is. We've had climate crisis pledges made here in Wales, in Westminster, and at the moment it's all this. There's a lot of talk and no action. So now there needs to be legislation to do things like, if people have relatives in Europe, they need to have more time to go and visit them if they're going to visit them by train. Of course, if you've got relatives on the other side of the ocean, you know, and there's an emergency or a baby born or somebody ill, you've got to fly. You have got to fly. But not everybody has relatives all over the world. And we're not talking about saying, right, we're going to stop, all of us stop flying tomorrow. We've just got to take it down. We've just got to take it down to a slightly more sane level.
You see a lot of airlines now, they're turning to reduce single-use plastics on their flights. Do you think that's worthwhile or a distraction?
I think it's sticking a plaster on a severed limb, really. However, plastics are an enormous problem, and people's perception of that problem has changed radically even in the last 2 years. So it's part of that change in perception. So it's a step in the right direction, you know. And I think one of the things that we really have to remember in all this is that we mustn't make best an enemy of better.
People might look back, 50 odd years and say, wow, what extravagance, all these plane travels, kind of £20 flights to wherever. And you'll say, okay, well, at least if they were flying regularly, they might have been punished, for example. But in fact, you have the opposite, where you have frequent flyer schemes. These people are rewarded. Yeah. So what do you think about maybe having an equivalent for train travel? I don't think it's anywhere near, if it does exist, I haven't seen it, like a regular railway.
Well, wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? Because at the moment, the aviation industry is massively subsidised in so many different ways. I'm not an economist, and so I don't know the details of that, but I know that it is, and it is bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. So maybe what we need to institute is a kind of quota system for flights, or like a kind of rationing system. You're allowed to take so many flights over a certain period of time. In the same way that we rationed butter during the war, we can ration flights.
Or trade them,
Or trade them, and
exactly.
if you can trade your flight with somebody who's got relatives in Australia, if you don't need to go further than, Manchester.
Going abroad, travelling, broadening your horizons, learning new things and experiencing new cultures, that does give you that expansive way of thinking. But some people say, oh, well, we're limiting ourselves if we don't get access to that and going abroad. So there's a kind of contradiction there, isn't there? It's somewhat frustrating. You want people to be able to explore the world and then bring that insight back.
I think you absolutely can still do that. It's just a question. It's going to have a bit more time around it.
And you need all the other structures to help you out. Yeah.
And one of the things, I was involved in a lovely project last year, writing a cycle of climate change poems in reaction to the work of a wonderful, wonderful climate change scientist called Professor Ed Hawkins. And one of the things I imagined was interviewing someone who had gone through what we're about to go through, hopefully, which is a radical change to a low carbon economy. And the person I imagined was living in a situation where, the climate had made things quite difficult. Climate change had made things quite difficult, and sea level rise had happened, and the climate of the UK was quite different, but that we had gone through that change to a low carbon economy. And what my imagined interviewee said was, everything's calmer now. We rushed around like mad things. It was crazy. All that getting and spending. And we realised we didn't need to do that. And he said, now people sit under trees and look at the greenery and take things more gently and more quietly. And I think that could be one of the benefits. We're all of us so focused on getting more and more stuff and working to have more stuff. Well, just don't have the stuff, and then you don't have to.
It seems eminently plausible as well. Kind of the way you painted that picture, where we might very well go to the brink and then kind of bring ourselves back, and you look at what might have been, and that scares you enough to think, whoa,
Yeah.
take the foot off the gas,
Yeah.
quite literally.
Yeah. All the other travelling that I've done on trains and lots of journeys on sailboats, on ferries, I absolutely love, because it feels like travel. It feels real. There's a quality of distancing unreality about the whole environment of an airport and a plane and popping up in another country in another time zone without having any sense of what you've passed through or over, that I find actually really unpleasant. My partner and I did a journey to Ibiza at the early part of this year. We drove in his 30-year-old restored Toyota Land Cruiser and took the ferry. Took the ferry from Portsmouth over to Caen and then down through France, into Spain, across Pyrenees, and then took the ferry from Barcelona to Ibiza. And I know that journey now. I really feel it. I can see it in my head on the map, and I know the features of the landscape. It feels real to me and deeply pleasurable. Even the part where the car broke down and we ended up having to sleep in a lorry park in the freezing cold, huddled under a duvet in the front of the car, in a sort of semi-sleep, unpleasant state. Even that part was kind of wonderful.
What do you say to people who think that reducing our impact on the environment shouldn't be up to the individual, and like you've alluded to before, who might feel powerless actually to affect it, and say, look, the top, whatever it is, 100 companies contribute to 80% of the world's global emissions. What power do I have as an individual? What do you say to? How do you inspire them?
Well, the first thing is that all those companies are top companies because they have a whole load of individuals around the world who buy their products. So actually, you, as a consumer of those products, are in the most powerful position you can possibly be. And the other thing I say to them, when I say this very often to children when I go into schools, is something that I saw every day of my life when I was a little girl. It was on the wall of our downstairs loo in a frame. Little drops of water, little grains of sand, make the mighty ocean and the promised land.
What's the furthest you've gone? Because we've kind of discussed the idea of flightless travel. You're not kind of giving up planes entirely, but have you kind of gone on extended? You said you took.
I have twice had to turn down a transatlantic voyage on a sail ship, which is immensely frustrating. But the longest journey I've done on a sailing boat, and I have the son of a friend went 3/4 of the way around the world in a 22-foot long sailing boat. Absolutely wonderful achievement, and had all sorts of adventures. But the longest journey I've done is from the south of Newfoundland in Canada up the coast of Labrador on a little 35-foot wooden sailing boat, which was just fabulous.
Phenomenal.
Totally. Oh yeah, and of course I've sailed from the Maldives to Sri Lanka.
What are some of the highlights in that isolation?
Oh wow! So many. Not isolation, because I was on. Was with 4 other crew members.
Right. Relative.
But the journey from the Maldives to Sri Lanka, we were at sea. I can't remember how many days now we were at sea. But when you're out at sea for a long time, you've probably heard people say this. The sea has very a low level of scent. There's not very much to smell, so your sense of smell gets incredibly heightened. And as we approached the coast of Sri Lanka, we were sailing round the bottom of Sri Lanka and round up to the top to Trincomalee, and we were far enough away so that the very highest point of Sri Lanka was just a little blip above the horizon, and there was a tropical storm that came down India over Sri Lanka and came out towards us, and it brought with it the smell of the forest vegetation, all the forest that this storm had passed. It picked up the scent and carried it and delivered it to our little boat, where we hadn't smelt anything at all for about 5 days.
Yeah.
And the smell of the land and the green and the flowers was the most amazing thing, the most extraordinary sensory experience. You wouldn't think you could be completely ravished by a natural smell, but let me tell you, you can be.
I was kind of
It's
living that with you
fabulous.
there.